Colac Otway Shire Council on 9th of August 2023. Almighty God, we seek your blessing and guidance in our deliberations on behalf of the people of the Colac Otway Shire. Enable this council's decisions to be those that contribute to the true welfare and betterment of our community. Amen. I'd like to start this afternoon by acknowledging the traditional custodians and lawmakers of this land, their elders past and present, and welcome any descendants here today. This meeting is recorded and live streamed with the exception of confidential matters. This includes the public participation sections of meetings. The live stream recording of this afternoon's meeting will be available on the website as soon as practicable. By participating in open meetings, individuals consent to the use and disclosure of the information they share at the meeting, including any personal and/or sensitive information. We have six councillors in the room, and we have Councillor Arnott joining us online. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, please? Councillor Costin?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a conflict of interest in relation to item 7.2, which is 979 Coringamite Lake Road, Colac. Conflict arises because a family member of mine assisted the applicant to prepare the application. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. Anybody else? Councillors, I propose that we move to confirm the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on Wednesday, the 10th of May 2023. Do I have a mover? Councillor Hart? Is there a seconder? Councillor Arnott, are you seconding? Thank you. Is it to be opposed? No opposition. Councillors, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour of the confirmation of the minutes? Thank you. It's carried 7-0. Councillors, now move to item 7.1, PP 329 stroke 2022-1-465 Birregurra Forest Road, Birregurra, two-lot subdivision. The purpose of this report is to consider the application for the re-subdivision of land and alteration of access to a road at 465 Birregurra Forest Road, Birregurra. Mr McNeil, would you be able to just introduce this item for councillors, please, and just a brief summary of how it is that it's here?
Thank you, Mayor. This application is for a two-lot re-subdivision of the land. It's a fairly large lot in the farming zone, and there's a number of different owners of this site. One of those owners has lodged this application with council, and I guess the thing that's a bit unusual about this one is that objectors to the application include other parties that are owners of the land. And I guess it's just important in terms of council's consideration of this that that it is possible for someone, an owner of land, to, it's possible for someone to lodge a planning application with council that we have to consider under the Planning and Environment Act, where not all of the landowners do consent to it. What our obligation is as a council is to assess the application on its planning merits and make a decision on that basis. Those other owners of the land were required to be notified by the applicant when the application was made, and that occurred. And those people have since made objections to council, and they'll be considered as any other objector would be, and have rights of appeal against council's decision if council was to support the application.
Thanks, Mr McNeil. Do we have any questions? Councillor Hart?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I understand that there's been a revised recommendation from the council officers. Can we get an explanation, please, of what those differences are? And I'm not sure if the one on the screen is the revised one or the original one.
Through you, Mayor, I can confirm that what's on the screen before you is the amended officer recommendation. This was circulated to councillors prior to the meeting to delete some of the conditions that Powercor had originally asked to be included on the permit if it's issued. Powercor had originally responded to this application with conditions that would normally be applied where there's vacant allotments, but because there's a house on each lot, officers went back to Powercor and they've revised their response on that basis. So there's less requirements that need to be applied because there's already houses existing on the lots. So we've deleted a few conditions and deleted a few of the notes at the bottom of the proposed recommendation. but they all of the deletions related to power core requirements that are no longer required.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillors, we have a revised officer recommendation with the report for our consideration. Does any councillor wish to move a motion in relation to this matter? Councillors, we've got a matter that we're obliged to consider. Thanks, Councillor Hart. Is there a second?
Just to be clear, I'm moving the revised officer recommendation.
Yep. Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Arnott, are you seconding?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Is it to be opposed? Councillor Costin, thank you. Councillor Hart?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks for the clarification that we have in relation to this, that although the application was lodged by one landholder, it wasn't necessarily agreed to by all the landholders, but that can be the case. In fact, I understand that a person can lodge a planning permit for a property they don't even own at all, providing they notify the owners. There was an issue raised as to whether everyone was notified, but I think the fact that we've got, the fact that we have objections from a number of people that whether or not letters may have been received, the fact is that they've found out about this application. So I'm satisfied that everyone that needs to be informed is aware that this application is before us and has an opportunity to comment. I think the issue on this one is that it meets the requirements of the farm zone. It will create two lots into two different size lots, but even the smaller of the two lots will be over the 40 hectare minimum lot size. And from that perspective, it's appropriate that we should grant this planning permit. It's then a matter for the owners of the property to decide whether or not they choose to implement or take advantage of this re-subdivision or boundary realignment if a planning permit's granted. So I think that's, to me, that's a key part of this issue. And I've said before in matters such as these, when we've had farm zone ones, I don't think it's up to council to start telling people how to run their farms. It meets the planning requirements. We grant a permit today, and then it is entirely up to the landholders to determine whether or not they act on using this planning permit.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillor Arnott?
Thank you, Mayor Potter. Yeah, look, I'd like to support Councillor Hart in his comments he's made on this and to endorse those, and that the office has confirmed that for us that all the statutory requirements have been met to notify the other interested parties for respect to this application, and that, as Councillor Hart says, this does comply with our council's established guidelines and policy for subdivisions of this nature and to the allotment size. So there is no statutory or council policy that inhibits our capacity to actually approve this subdivision application. So for those reasons, I endorse the motion. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Costin, you wish to speak against?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I support a number of the objectors who've raised the issue that the subdivision doesn't comply with the objectives of our farm zone or follow our rural land strategy prepared in 2007. The objectives of the zone are to preserve and preferably enhance or grow our agricultural activity, and we need bigger properties for that, not smaller properties. This subdivision will fragment a viable farm, a large viable farm, and lead to inefficient farming practices on the two smaller lots that are left behind. In effect, it will create a lifestyle property of the smaller lot. The rural land strategy proposes that farms need to get bigger to become more economic and more financially viable. And that's confirmed by the Agriculture Department who show a much larger farm is required to be financially viable in the longer term. 40 hectares by itself, it becomes a lifestyle property. It will detract from our agricultural economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Costin. Councillor Arnott, I could just see a piece of you in the bottom of the screen. Yeah, if you can stay in view, please. Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you. The officers have assessed this planning application against the planning scheme and have assessed it to be a viable or supported the application. It's for a 2-lot subdivision that does meet the requirements of the planning scheme for minimum lot sizes, with the smaller lot being above the 40 hectares, just over. We have an obligation to assess it on its planning merits, and it meets the requirements of the farming zone. At the size of the farm, at the smaller lot at 40 hectares, is accepted at state level, and therefore there's not the need for the farm management plan. It's very hard, to not vote in favour of this application due to it meeting all the requirements of the planning scheme. So therefore, I will be supporting the application.
Thanks, Councillor Hanson. Any other councillor? Councillor Hart, right, a reply?
Thanks, Mayor. In instances where we have requested farm management plans, that's been for lots that haven't met the 40 hectare minimum. I don't think we've ever requested one for a lot that meets the minimum set out in the planning scheme. I think the question has to be asked, if we were to refuse this application and say 40 hectares isn't enough, then what is the figure? How do we come to that? And how is the community to assess how to put in a planning application if that was rejected on that basis? I really don't think it's appropriate or necessary for councils either to start making assumptions about how a farm might be managed. And I dare say that the farmers and community generally want a bit less red tape rather than councils starting to tell people how to run their farms. So I think the fact that it meets the 40 hectares really seals that we should be granting this permit.
Thanks, Councillor Hart. Councillors, I'll put the motion to a vote. All those in favour? Against? The motion is carried 6-1.
Division.
Division is called. All those in favour? Councillor White, Councillor Hart, Councillor Arnott, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Hanson, Councillor Potter. Against? Thanks, Councillor Costin. Councillor Costin against. Councillors, next item 7.2. Councillor Costin, you declared a conflict of interest.
Thank you, Mayor. Go through it again.
Yeah, just go through it again for us, thanks.
Okay. I have a general conflict of interest in this item, and the conflict of interest arises because a family member of mine assisted the applicant to prepare the original application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillors, item 7.2, 979 Corangamite Lake Road, Coragulac, proposed dwelling and shed. Purpose of this report is to consider the application for the use and development of the land at 979 Corangamite Lake Road, Coragulac. Do councillors have any questions of officers? Councillor Finnegan.
Just flagging I've got an alternative to the officer recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Hart, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd like to get some assurance from council management, if I can, that the various reports that have assessed the LV landfill, which is next to this site, have now been made available to the applicant. And How recently did that occur, please?
So through the chair, the applicant made a request for the most recent report in relation to the Alvey landfill, and that recent report was provided as a hard copy yesterday. Okay, the applicant didn't ask for other documents at this time, and if there are others that are of a similar nature that are also appropriate for release, we'll provide those as well. But they asked for one, and so that has been provided.
Thank you. Any other questions? Ms McNeil, I have a question just in relation to an application for a separate application for a shed on this property. How does this matter, if at all, affect that subsequent application or different application?
Through you, Mayor. So the application before you today is for a dwelling and a store or shed on the property. The applicant has separately lodged a different planning application more recently for the shed or the store separately, and so we're treating that application independently of this one. So, and the two can be dealt with completely independently. So council can make a decision whether to approve or refuse this application, and that won't have any bearing on then how the officers then consider on its merits the shed application.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Finnegan. Councillor Finnegan flagged a motion. Is that the one up on the screen?
No, it's this one here. So, yes, so this motion seeks to approve this permit with a few conditions, approve this planning permit with a few conditions, particularly around some issues around consolidating the lots, around now that the information has been provided to the applicant around landfill gas reports and the like, and it sets a path forward for this. Sets a path forward for this development to occur, provided the conditions of the permit are met.
Thank you. Councillors, we all familiar with the motion on the screen. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hart. Is the motion to be opposed? Councillor Finnegan.
Sorry, that's what the inside of my head sounds like at all times.
Yeah.
So that's
So you're used to the noise?
yeah,
so you'll be able to bat on.
Used to the noise. I think that really this is a matter that's sort of been under consideration by the council for an amount of time. It's come back to the planning committee a few times for consideration, and it's been deferred. There's been some, there's been some back and forth between the applicant, between council, and around information that has now been provided. Now that information's been provided, we hope it puts the applicant in a good position to be able to go and meet the conditions of this permit if we do vote to approve.
Thank you. Councillor Hart.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. In speaking to this, I want to draw some differences from the refusal. First of all, this site is in the farm zone, but anyone that's seen the site would, and where it's positioned, would realise that there's no prospect of it being contributing towards a functioning farm. It's isolated in that sense, and it's quite small. So I think that there's no reason to reject this because of the size of the land. The key issue is to do with whether the landfill or the former landfill at Alvey has anything that would or should prevent a house being constructed on this particular site, a dwelling. And the council has released some reports just in very recent times, which will help an assessment as to whether or not the dwelling should be allowed to go ahead. the way this permit has been framed, if this resolution gets through, and obviously I'm speaking in support of it, is that with those reports that have been provided about the LV landfill, and I understand that one of them was sourced through an FOI request to the EPA, who has certainly cooperated in providing information. With these various reports, that the applicant will now be in a position to get those assessed to demonstrate whether or not a dwelling should be allowed to be constructed or renovated at that site. So whilst this is a grant of a permit, it has some significant conditions which require those issues to be resolved. And I think the difference in handling this matter this way is the applicant can be assured that as long as they can get over that hurdle, they have a permit. How it was being handled previously, they could have got over that hurdle and still be having all these issues with the farm zone, which I don't think are relevant because of the position of this particular block. So I think this is a very sensible way of handling this matter, and I commend Councillor Finnegan for finding a way through this.
Thank you. Any other councillor? Councillor White.
I just want to say I support Councillor Hart and Councillor Finnegan in this, and it has been back and forth for a long time, and we are aware that the applicant is really keen to get a dwelling, and, you know, in the end we want to enable our community to make the best of their situations, and I think Councillor Hart's right, it is in the farming zone, but if you've visited the site, it's clearly not a very adequate area for any significant farming. So I think to try and enable our applicant to get the information he needs to then fulfil the conditions of the permit is a different way of going about it, and hopefully it will resolve the situation and get the applicant a dwelling.
Thank you. Nobody else? Max.
Thank you, Mayor Potter. Look, I'd just like to reaffirm the comments from Councillor White and Councillor Hart. I agree with what they've said. I also support the motion as put forward by Councillor Finnegan. I'll note that the reports that have been provided to the owner of the land, the applicant, were always going to be available to a professional consultant in respect to the landfill and its potential effect. And I supported them being made available to the applicant in the first place anyway. I think there's no reason not to. But it's important to also remember that these reports must be professionally assessed for the safety of the construction of a dwelling. We've had too many times of reports you'll have seen in the paper or in the news where people have had residences built close to landfill and then had problems with methane output from that later. And there have been significant liabilities to authorities around that by allowing those residences to be built there without doing proper due diligence. So this is the case of doing due diligence. The applicant can be assured that if the due diligence finds out that he can safely construct a dwelling there, then he'll be able to proceed knowing that the application will be accepted. But we must tick this off first for the safety of the applicant and for the safety of anyone else who may live in there in the future if they were to subsequently purchase the property. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Arnott. Anybody else? You happy, Councillor Finnegan? Thanks, councillors. I will put the motion to a vote now. All those in favour? Thank you. The motion is carried 6-0. Could we get Councillor Costin back into the room, please? Thanks for coming back in, Councillor Costin. Councillors and everyone, that concludes the planning meeting for today. Thank you. Thanks to the staff for all the work they put in.